Okay. So my background is I grew up in New York City in a very toxic environment. So the there was lead paint on the walls, there was vermin, there was um, dangerous people, but the most dangerous thing that was around me was the food. So I had access to unhealthy food in small amounts. And what happened is it made me prioritize eating because there wasn't a lot of food. And then the food that I was eating, even at that time, and I'm 57 years old, was either processed or ultra processed food: meat, chicken, dairy, animal products. And as a result, we used food as a reward system and we would fight over food. And as soon as I became independent and I wanted to eat more food, so my whole life was about eating. And then at age 17, I joined the US Army. And the Army has a whole different philosophy on food. When you're not in combat and you're not out in the field, they have cafeterias with an abundance of food. It just doesn't taste very good. They use a lot of salt, a lot of oil, and they put some other stuff in the food, that really, who knows what it was. But that was just another area of food that was part of my life. And when I got out of the Army, I became a workaholic and I started to work one job, two jobs, three jobs. And my life became around working and eating. And I never thought much about it until 1999, April. And it's actually now 26 years to the day that um, I had this awakening. And what happened was my aunt developed type 2 diabetes. And I'm sure, unfortunately, there's probably people in this call who either have type 2 diabetes or know people that have type 2 diabetes. And I had never heard of type 2 diabetes. I just thought my family and my aunt was overweight. Turns out, technically, she was overweight, obese, and she had type 2 diabetes. And we were informed that they were going to amputate both of her feet below the ankles. And I couldn't imagine what that would be like not to be able to walk, not to have that freedom and that faculty and the agency to be able to walk. And in her case, it almost didn't matter because soon after they amputated both of her feet, she died with heart disease. And then my uncle died of heart disease. And then my mother developed stomach cancer, and my father developed heart disease. And they all, within a very short period of time, all gone. My brother became overweight, obese, diabetic, and then he had the first of three strokes and two heart attacks. So I really thought that everyone was going to get sick, everyone was going to die, and that was only a matter of time until it happened to me. I made no connection between what I ate and my lifestyle and longevity, death, and mortality. So it was really, really awakening. And we were in New York. I was 33 at the time, living in New York City. And I was out and about, and I met someone that was plant based. She was vegan. She ate fruits and vegetables. And it was so foreign to me that I couldn't even believe here was this beautiful woman, very healthy, well educated. And she said to me, she goes, "You're not genetically cursed. You are living a toxic, diabetic, heart disease laden lifestyle." And I couldn't believe it. I thought I was healthy. And so this whole trigger for me turned out to be tragic because I thought my whole life, everything that I believed in was all like false. So I had to think about what I could do to change. And this woman, her name was Denise, she said, well, you can just eat fruits and vegetables and no processed food, no animal products, no dairy, no fast food. And I was saying, well, what was I going to eat? There's nothing left. This is all there is. And it took me about 2 weeks of struggling till I went from eating anything to eating vegetarian, vegan, and then raw vegan. And I'm still 99% raw vegan. And I've been over 90, 95% for the last 26 years. So what happened is in New York City, I was scrambling to find out what I could eat. So I'd go to the farmer's market, I would go to Lifetime Market, I would go to various places. There was just one Whole Foods at the time that I can remember. And I just started to grab food that I thought was healthy and then I would eat it. And nothing really changed in my life. Like I thought maybe I would become emaciated. I thought maybe I wouldn't have energy, but it turns out that I had the energy. And then I realized how difficult it was that to live this lifestyle. So I made the shift to seeing where I could make it easier for other people to eat what I was eating. And I could define very simply I was eating fresh fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, seaweed, and sprouts. So, sprouts were actually part of my diet, unbeknownst to me, 5 years prior to that. 31 years ago, I started to eat sunflower sprouts, alfalfa sprouts, and mung bean sprouts because I saw them at the farmer's market. And even though I was eating all this other stuff, when I tasted them, something resonated in my brain that said, oh, these are really good. I like these. And they were such a small part of my diet, maybe once a week, in small quantities. But I had them, and those seeds had been planted inside my whole DNA. So fast forward 25 years later, like I'm still eating my raw food. I'm traveling, I'm working, and I ended up in the desert. So I went to my first event in the desert and I was like, wow, it's so peaceful here. It's really magical. And then I said, I can live in the desert, but I need hot springs. So I had been on this whole quest for over 20 years trying to find hot springs. I went around the world and then I had this gut intuition, this gut feeling that there were hot springs near Joshua Tree. And I found them. I put a stake in the ground and we called it Wonder Valley Hot Springs. And this became a new world for me. And I set up camp in Wonder Valley Hot Springs. And I was saying, how am I going to live? Because not only was I in the desert, I was in a food desert. I was so far away from farmers markets, health food stores, vegan restaurants, like there was nothing here. And I'd never really grown anything in my life. So the idea of growing my own food really didn't seem to be an option. But then I got this idea, this communion with the universe, where the universe said, Doug, you can sprout. And I knew about sprouting. I had sprouted a little, but I never took it very seriously. And here, sprouts were presented to me as an option for my my life that I was going to have to think about this. So not too much other than me scribbling down this deep download from the universe. And it came, and the first thing that I learned was sprouts were vegetables. They weren't just this little garnish or side dish. Sprouts were vegetables, full vegetables, because the seed is a complete living organism in a dormant state. And when you take that organism and you add water and you soak it and you germinate it, it goes through a metabolic transformation into a vegetable. It's a small vegetable, and the small vegetable is called a sprout. And so that was a big epiphany. Number one, sprouts were vegetables. Number two, sprouts were vitamins and minerals. Now, growing up, I took Flintstones chewable vitamins. And then I always heard in the back of my mind, oh, you need to take a multivitamin, take a multivitamin. And I didn't know anything about vitamins or the source of the vitamins or the like. So I started to research, and turns out that everyone talks about protein. Every single sprout contains every single amino acid that forms complete proteins. So the big aha moment, I could get protein from sprouts. Number two, sprouts contain fiber. Soluble and insoluble fiber are in sprouts. Now, everyone's talking about protein, but the reality is 95% of people are not protein deficient, but they are fiber deficient. And here, sprouts were a great source of fiber. Sprouts also have A vitamin, B vitamin, C vitamin, like the list goes on. Every single micronutrient, phytonutrient, polyphenol, bioflavonoid, antioxidant existed in this realm of sprouts. So the idea that I needed supplementation or I needed protein powders or the like, all gone, because I now were getting vitamins and minerals from sprouts. And then the third, and this was really hard to process for me, even though I had heard, and I believe we've all heard this at some point, the Hippocrates statement, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Could it be that Hippocrates was talking about sprouts, that sprouts were medicine? So we didn't have AI back then, but we did have the internet, we did have libraries, we did have universities, experts. So I started to research. And it turns out there were thousands of peer-reviewed, published papers, studies, extensive literature on the medicinal properties of sprouts. So it's well known that the cruciferous family of vegetables has these anti-cancer compounds. But for most people, that's all there is. They know that. So as I went down this rabbit hole, it turns out that they are all healthy and they all have somewhat of the cancer, anti-cancer properties. But one particular vegetable, broccoli, had the most. And broccoli is a glucosinolate, or broccoli has glucosinolates in it that actually have these anti-cancer compounds. So when you look at broccoli, one of the questions was, well, what kind of broccoli? And that's an interesting question. But the better question is, what stage of broccoli has the most? Is it the seed? Is it the sprout? Is it the microgreen or is it the big mature broccoli that you get in the market? And it turns out the seed has the most. The problem is the seed is really not designed to be directly ingested because it has lectins, it has phytic acid, it has enzyme inhibitors, and they use that to protect the seed. And when you soak the seed and when you germinate the seed, you remove the enzyme inhibitors, you remove the lectins, you remove the phytic acid, and you initiate this biological metabolic transformation from a seed, which is a dormant living organism, into a sprout, which is a living vegetable. So, very simple concept. I had no idea. And when you look at seeds versus mature broccoli, turns out day 3 of broccoli seeds sprouting are the most bioavailable, the most concentrated, the most nutrient dense stage of the broccoli because on day 3, it's already made that shift. And if you look really carefully at the literature, at the science, as the broccoli seed grows into a broccoli sprout and a microgreen and a mature broccoli, it actually is getting diluted. The glucosinolate, glucoraphanin is actually getting diluted. So the younger it is, the more tender it is, the most concentrated it is. And so broccoli was this winner. And the research, and there's a lot of research about the chemoprotective properties, the anti-cancer protective properties, but there's also more. Broccoli sprouts actually help regulate insulin levels in diabetics. And so if you're consuming the broccoli sprouts, it is actually helping regulate the insulin levels, the insulin sensitivity, and the broccoli sprouts are high fiber, low calorie, low fat. So really, really good for this healing journey. The other thing that I learned about broccoli sprouts is they have a unique capacity to detoxify benzene and air pollutants from the lungs. So it's not just the million firefighters in the United States, it's the millions of people who have ever smoked a cigarette, who've ever smoked marijuana, who've ever smoked a pipe or a cigar. The broccoli sprouts can help heal the lungs and the lung damage from the smoking and the combustion and from the toxic chemicals that are created during the combustion process. So they're really, really exciting. Another thing about the broccoli sprouts is that when you eat them, they're a food. So it's something that you actually can eat on a regular basis. And we could go in, and there's a lot of literature about them. But even other sprouts, seemingly so innocent and sweet, like the green pea. So the green pea, when sprouted in the dark, stresses the plant because it's not getting light, and it actually creates DAO, which is actually a natural form of antihistamine. So there's all of these things that occur in nature. And most drugs, like we everyone knows about aspirin. Well, aspirin wasn't made in a lab. Today it is. But original aspirin was made from willow bark. So the connection of food as medicine and herbs as medicine is not new. that information goes back hundreds and thousands of years. And there's actually research and hieroglyphics and drawings in a cage that go back to 6,000 years to the pharaohs that show the origin of food being medicine. So for me, it was really reduced to sprouts are food, sprouts are vitamins and minerals, and sprouts are medicine. So with that, I decided that I now knew what I was going to do. I was going to write the sprout book, right? Fast forward a couple of years later, the sprout book um, came out. And because I'm not a doctor, I decided to reach out to doctors. So I reached out to Dr. Joel Furman, Dr. Joel Kahn, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Josh Axe, Dr. Mark Hyman. Um, and I asked these doctors, what do they think of sprouts? Hey, doc, what do you think of sprouts? And even though some of these doctors were plant-based, some of them other were not. They believed in eating fish. They believed in eating meat. They believed in dairy. But they loved sprouts more than I did because they knew more about it at the time. So I asked them, would they contribute? Could I interview them? Would they share their knowledge in my book? And, blessings happened, and Dr. Joel Furman wrote the foreword, and all these other doctors shared their time and their information and their passion with me for sprouts and sprouting. And that became the genesis of the Sprout book. So I spent years researching, studying sprouts, and there's a whole world of sprouts. But I'm going to back up for a minute and say, what is a sprout? Okay. A sprout is a seed that is germinated, that is going into the process of forming a vegetable. And that is what a sprout. It's a label for a vegetable somewhere between market stage, garden stage vegetables and seeds. And the circle of life is very simple. Like you take a seed, you germinate it, it grows into a sprout. And that can take 0 to 5 days. And in that process of 0 to 5 days, 0 to 7 days, no soil required, no fertilizer required, no sunshine required. So what's happened is within the seed, nature has embodied and enclosed the food for it to grow on its own. So that's really powerful. So you add water, it takes oxygen and carbon from the atmosphere, and it starts to grow. So that's a sprout. And what sprouts? Alfalfa sprouts, radish sprouts, broccoli sprouts, clover, lentils, fenugreek, pea, cannabis, beets, celery, cucumber, tomatoes, peppers. Every seed sprouts. Now, some taste better than others, and you've got what we would call seeds. Then there are legumes, and then there are pulses, and then there are grains. And for them to reproduce and for them to grow, they sprout too. So there's a lot of things that could sprout. You could sprout rice, you could sprout grasses, and you could sprout wheat. And sprouted food, now that I've planted some seeds in your brain, you're going to see sprouting everywhere. What I'm most passionate about are taking the seeds, sprouting them into vegetables and eating them. So I'm just going to recap one part. Seeds sprout without soil, without sunshine, without fertilizer, and they do it in days. And if you can think about the power of something that can actually grow so quickly, that's so nutritious, there's one question. Why isn't everybody sprouting? And that was a question that I asked. So I think the main reason why sprouting isn't everywhere is because sprouts have a very short shelf life and people don't know about them. So when you go into the health food store, like you can go into Whole Foods or you could go into Walmart or you could go to Albertsons, they have tens of thousands of items that they are selling every single day. And most of those items, not all, but most, are processed, are refined, are ultra processed, have additives, have preservatives, had food colors, are genetically modified, and they're in boxes and packaging and the like. And they do that under the guise of safety. But is it really for safety or is it for convenience? And so convenience equals profitability and scalability. So for me, my greatest blessing, as hard as this is, was the loss of my entire family for me, because that made me fully present to know that everything that I eat was a choice, was a life or death decision, and could positively or adversely impact my life. So that's a little background on sprouts. So another thing is like, what's the process of how do you grow these sprouts? And I was going to have all of these props and all these diagrams. It's very simple. You take a jar, and this could be a regular mason jar, or it could be a custom, well designed sprouting jar. You can add cheesecloth over it, or you could have a plastic screen or a metal screen or any other way to act as a filter. So the core equipment you need is a jar, you need a filter, you need water. And a big question I get all the time is, well, what kind of water do I use? Well, I'm using reverse osmosis distilled water, but some people use spring water, some people use tap water. And the recommendation is to use the best water that you have access to. So clearly, chlorine will act as an antiseptic, antibiotic. So it's probably not the best. And a little secret that you can have, if you have chlorinated water, you can put it into a pot and let it air out overnight. And the chlorine will actually turn into saline and will uh, lessen its level of toxicity just by being exposed to the air. So I do that if I'm in a hotel. I fill up the bathtub as soon as I get there, and then the next morning I take a cold bath, um, because I don't want the chlorine, and I certainly don't want to inhale the hot chlorine fumes. But for the sprouts, you want to use the best water that you have available and you have access to. So you need the jar, you need the water, you need a filter, and then you need seeds. So I've been evangelizing, for no better word, sprouts for the last 7 years as a full-time job. Like I'm out there, I'm talking about sprouts every day. Sometimes in sub-Saharan Africa, there's only a certain type of seed available, and no question whether that's organic or not. Some people are living in the urban environments where they're just getting beans from a bulk bin. But if you're listening to this and you're watching this course, I would recommend the highest quality seed that you can get, which is organic, which is tested for pathogens, which is tested for a high germination rate, and that's even further tested for glyphosate residue. Glyphosate, aka Roundup, is a pesticide that is very, very common in agriculture in the United States, and it gets everywhere. And there are literally thousands of lawsuits of against people that have gotten cancer from being exposed to Roundup, um, glyphosate. So I really recommend that being a standard. And if those seeds are available in tons of varieties, and so you get the seeds, you get the jar, you get the filter and the lid. Once you have those, you take whether it's 1 tablespoon or 4 tablespoons or a cup. And I wrote a whole book on that. But for the purpose of this uh, explanation, I will say if you start with a 1 quart jar, 32-ounce jar, you could use 2 tablespoons of seeds, and whether it be alfalfa or radish or clover or broccoli, 2 tablespoons of seeds in the jar. You add the seeds to the jar. You fill up enough water to fully submerge the seeds, and you let them sit overnight. And then the following morning, you strain off the water, you add some fresh water, you swirl it around, and then you pour off that water, and then you leave the jar inverted at approximately a 30-degree angle so that the extra water strains out. And then you do that rinse and repeat process 2 times a day, and you will be an expert sprouter. Like, it's unbelievable. I went from never growing anything to growing my own vegetables. And within 1 cubic foot, like the size of a milk crate, it's about a cubic foot. I had 6 jars growing, and I was growing edible vegetables, thousands of calories of edible vegetables. And that's what I was eating every single day. And so I started to live on sprouts. Now, I'm not recommending to you because you don't have to live on sprouts. But for me, I was having an existential food crisis combined with my knowledge that all of these other things that were even remotely near me weren't food. So sprouts became the best alternative for me at that moment in my life. Today, 26 years later, I'm eating sprouts, sea vegetables, and fruit. And I don't do oil. I don't do added salt. I don't do any processed food. I do no meat, dairy, animal products. So I'm eating fruit, sprouts, sea vegetables, and I feel so good. I feel so alive. And I feel really blessed that I know this information, and even more blessed that I have the opportunity to share it with you. So, one of the other common questions I get is, what do you do with the sprouts? So, since they're vegetables, and since I eat vegetables, I can graze on them all through the day. I can add them to a smoothie. I can juice with the sprouts. I can add them to a salad, to a wrap. And I make a funny joke that I don't add sprouts to my soup. I add soup to my sprouts because I want more sprouts first, but you could do either way. And then the like most obvious aha moment was that I could use sprouts as the base of my salad. So sprouts could be the base of my salad. And all of a sudden, I'm making enormous salads with alfalfa, with radish, with clover, with broccoli, with green pea, with lentils. And I got a big salad. And the things that I love most on being on this diet, this lifestyle, is I love sprouts and I love ferments. So sauerkraut is amazing from a prebiotic, probiotic perspective, and they play really nicely with the sprouts. So I will use sauerkraut and sauerkraut brine with the sprouts, and that's my dressing. And I love tahini, small amounts of tahini, which is basically just a sesame seed, or in my case, a sprouted sesame seed paste as a base of the dressing. And then, if you want to be creative, you can use the salad as the inside of making sushi. So all of my sushi for 26 years has no fish, but has the sea vegetable, or in this case, the nori. And then if you have access to other organic vegetables, whether it's asparagus or lettuces or greens or carrots, you can add them. You could add non-sweet fruit like cucumbers, like bell peppers, like tomatoes. In our family, we call them gadgets. So you can throw all those things in, and then you can wrap them up into a wrap, and then you're getting this abundant meal. Now, people who work out are obsessed with protein. And I have nothing against protein. I'm just not obsessed with protein. I think of protein as just one um, requirement for health, but there are many, many requirements. And the obsession on protein, I think, really was a result of propaganda. Because when someone comes up to me and they go, "Oh, well, Doug, where do you get your protein?" My question to them is, where did you get that question? Are you an expert on, are you studying nutritional science? And I realized one of the reasons why nutrition is so highly debated, why it's such a big topic, is because if you said to someone you're a plumber and someone had a plumbing question, they honor, "Oh, I'm the plumber. Yeah, I do it like this." Because most people have no experience with plumbing. But everyone has experience with food, and everyone knows someone who's an expert at food. So therefore, everyone has opinions about food. And so they use these opinions about food as a dialogue. So it used to be, don't talk about sex, don't talk about religion, right? But now I almost say don't talk about nutrition, but it's so polarizing. And there's so many camps, like from where I am as this raw vegan to the other side, where you have people who are just eating meat. Like, believe it or not, like I can't even believe it, but there are people who really just eat meat, right? There's even, someone who's doing more. And so, in the case of where that is and what you can do with it, you can actually take, if you want protein, you could take sprouted garbanzo beans, sprouted green peas, sprouted lentils, and use those as a substitute to protein powders because they are a whole food as opposed to a fractional food that's extracted. And I really believe that we benefit from whole foods. Now, there's been research studies that talked about the benefit of beta carotene, vitamin A, and its anti-cancer properties. And people got so excited about this, they did a test with people who had cancer and people um, giving these patients, um, vitamin A supplements or control group, nothing. And it turned out that they had to stop the trial and stop the test early. And it's not because what you think. They stopped it because people were dying. And it wasn't that the people were dying who weren't getting the vitamin A. Turns out the people who were getting the vitamin A supplements were dying. So when you take a nutrient out of its complete organism and you isolate it, it actually can have adverse effects. Therefore, food as vitamins or food as supplements or food as medicine, in my belief, in like my world, that is the healthiest thing that you could do. So you actually can make your food be very medicinal. And so that's the world for the smoothies, for the salads. Now, in the case of healing, and I was just had the privilege to this past Sunday, I had lunch at the Hippocrates Health Center in West Palm Beach. They have the most amazing salad bar with a dozen different fresh sprouts and krauts and ferments that I almost would think about moving to West Palm Beach just so I could go and be fed this most nutritious food every day and have someone else prepare it for me. But then I realized it's so easy to do on your own, that sprouting is so simple. There's a chapter in the Sprout book called Junkyard Dog. And in the process of writing that, I realized that you could take almost anything and use it to sprout. There's so many easy things that allow everyone to sprout. So the notion of sprouting, growing your own food is so simple. And I've been around the world visiting people sprouting, in India, in Japan, in China, and sprouts are not new. The research goes back 6,000 years to people sprouting. And I think sprouts were the original food, the original medicine, because they grow so quickly and they grow without the soil, sunshine, or fertilizer. So, Michael, I'm going to take a pause and a breath, and I think we should open it up to some questions.
All right, sounds good. So, thank you so much for that great information. Now, before we go ahead and start with the Q&A, how would people get in touch with you, follow your work? Are you
So, my name is Doug Evans, and I wrote the Sprout book. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok, and very easy to find on any search engine. Um, and I answer all almost all questions on social media through my Instagram account at Doug Evans, and also um, I'm constantly sharing this information. And, my full-time job now, is split between product development for the Sprouting Company and sharing this message and this gospel, about sprouting, online through social media, through podcasts, and the like.
great? Thank you. So,
And lastly, one other thing, you can sign up for my newsletter on thesproutbook.com. Sign up for my newsletter, and I send out letters, a couple times a month, and good information in there.
so for our audience who are interested in asking questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll put how to do so in chat for those who don't know how to do it. So, um, actually, we had T. Colin Campbell on over the last couple of days, actually, and he was talking specifically
What
about
an
that.
honor.
Yeah, absolutely. He was on yesterday and today, so I got to speak with him twice, and he's just unbelievably knowledgeable. And he was talking about that the study, I believe, was with lung cancer patients, if I'm correct, or with the vitamin,
Yes,
where the people who had lung cancer had vitamin A, and they were dying.
yes.
Stop them. So, okay. So what nutrients can we expect to find, or should we even care what nutrients? To go with T. Colin Campbell's whole philosophy, does it even matter what nutrients are in sprouts per se, as compared to eating sprouts are good for you, and if you eat them, you're going to have great health?
I would add to it, Michael, you're a very smart man. I would add that you want to have a variety of sprouts in your diet, and you want to have a variety of fresh plants in your diet. And if you're eating enough variety and you're eating enough calories, you are going to be satisfied, satiated, and healthy. That there animals in nature aren't studying the plant, worrying about what its nutritional um, makeup is, right? So a lot of this intuitive eating gets totally blown and destroyed when you're eating processed food that has added oil, added salt, added fat, added sweeteners, because it corrupts the brain. Like those expert food scientists working out of New Jersey or Minneapolis, they know how to trick you and to dupe you into consuming their food over and over and over again, whether it be healthy or not.
So talking about satiation, when people think about sprouts, I live in the plant-based world. They'll say rabbit food. How do you maintain being satisfied with a predominantly sprout-based diet? What sprouts do you eat that are most filling and satiating?
So, what I know is that the healthiest ones are the garden variety, the alfalfa, the radish, the clover, the broccoli. What gives you the greatest sense of fullness are the legumes and the pulses and the grains. So if you're eating sprouted peas, sprouted garbanzo beans, sprouted lentils, they're very filling, they're very crunchy, and they also have quite a bit of caloric value to them. And so it's interesting, like if you were to sprout a lentil, you triple the vitamin C levels, you quadruple the antioxidants and fiber content. So a lot of this magic is happening when you are sprouting the various foods.
Great, thank you. And what about sprouting nuts and seeds? I know it's
If
popular
you're
at
go,
Hippocrates.
I think that if you're going to eat nuts, they should be raw, they should be unpasteurized, and they certainly should be soaked and sprouted. Definitely, unequivocally, just to make them more bioavailable and more digestible. Otherwise, you're eating this high fat content, with high protein, but it's not really bioavailable and it's not that easy to digest.
Okay. And are there nuts that you would recommend and seeds that are great for sprouting and better than others, or they're all pretty much equal?
Um, there's a wide array. I think that almonds Soaked, sprouted, germinated, unpasteurized almonds are very good. Sunflower seeds are amazing. And I prefer like a sunflower seed um, paste or sunflower butter over a nut butter because of the nutritional profile of them. But a lot of it is, splitting hairs, right? Most important thing is we want to get people to be healthy, and we want to eliminate processed and ultra processed food, and we want to eliminate the consumption of animal products and getting people to consume more plants. So the nuance of which ones, it's really about personal preference.
And um, when people want to go and find these, can they just go to the supermarket and get a bag of nuts? Like, what do they need to look for in order to ensure that they're going to be able to, sprout, become more bioavailable, and be clean for that matter?
I mean, they really need to be raw, unpasteurized, organic. That those would be the standards that I would look for, in the seeds and the nuts.
Great, thank
And
you.
just be forewarned, like you go into the average supermarket, every single nut in there is roasted and salted. So to me, like that, it may taste good, may look good, but it certainly doesn't fit into the realm of being a health food.
Thanks. So, are there studies that support the idea that sprouts are like that amazing, or is it something intuitive, as opposed to just regular, plants? Are sprouts particularly more healthy than the general vegetables that are out there that people are familiar with eating?
Well, I think, healthy is a subjective comment. I believe there is a lot of peer-reviewed published research that talks about the increasing nutritional content of value of sprouts um, that is not subjective. So objectively, the research is there, and sprouts are considered to have 20 to 100 times the nutrient density of their mature vegetable counterparts.
Wow. And so obviously with all those nutrients, they contribute to a balanced diet. Are there any nutrients that they lack that should be supplemented for through other foods or supplements?
I I think that the awareness, there's a lot of talk about omega-3 fatty acids, and chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts are very rich in ALA omega-3s. Now, if the body is fine-tuned and you are consuming ample amounts of ALA omega 3s from chia, flax, and walnuts, then the body can efficiently convert them and make EPA and DHA. If the body is not efficient and all systems are blocked, then it might make sense to get a test and then to supplement. My strategy, in addition to eating sprouted chia, sprouted flax, sprouted walnuts, is to eat sea vegetables, algae, in particular, wakame and nori seaweed, because they are high concentrations directly of EPA and DHA, which are the omega 3s in a direct source. So it's so interesting to me that many people are getting a fish oil supplement, which is most likely rancid and a um, extracted, isolated food. Um, but when you ask, well, where is the salmon getting the omega 3s from? Where is the salmon getting the EPA and DHA? It's getting it from the sea vegetables. So it's really powerful, and it's really possible to bypass the animal and get the source directly from the algae. So I think if you're eating sea vegetables and you're eating sprouted chia and flax, you do not need to supplement omega 3s. And you can test that. It's very simple to get a test for omega 3s. So that's one. Vitamin B12 is something that the body um, does not produce. Now, I remember asking Dr. Colin Campbell over 15 years ago about B12. And he said that he didn't trust what the studies were for what the recommended levels were of this extracted nutrient, and vitamin B. So that was, always lingering in my mind. But then you hear the fear factor that says, oh, well, if you're not taking B12, you could get brain damage and the like. So I will occasionally take a B12 sublingual supplement, or even more remotely, do a intramuscular injection, just a shot of B12 if I'm in an environment that they have it, because I do not have a direct means today of consuming B12. But what I will also say is when you look at things that people say that contain B12, like brewer's yeast, most brewer's yeast is supplemented with B12 into it. So they're fortifying these things with the B12. Now, people are saying you need to eat red meat to get B12. Well, it turns out they are fortifying the food that they're feeding to the cow to get the B12. So it's not like the cow is producing B12 from consuming wild grasses and the bacteria. They're actually fortifying the cow feed to get the B12. So B12 is something also to be aware of. And then I live in the desert. I'm out during the day with the sun. So I'm getting vitamin D, but vitamin D is not very efficiently or commonly um, appearing in many foods. There are certain mushrooms and foods that have it, but it's very rare. So if you're not getting the sun and you are very pale, um, you should supplement vitamin D in high degrees. And, it's described, I don't think vitamin D is this magic vitamin, but I do think it's very important. And I would love to get it from the sun. Turns out the darker someone's skin is, the more direct sun exposure they need to have in order to get the right levels of vitamin D. And for that reason, I would suggest testing and doing a periodic blood makeup to see how your numbers are in comparison, so you can decide whether you want to supplement or whether you want to change your lifestyle or behavior or diet or habits.
So I actually had the same exact conversation with Colin Campbell today about B12. And he said the exact same thing that you just said. He did say though that there is no downside to not or to taking the B12 because it'll just flush out of your system if you don't need it. And according to some doctors, they say that it could take up to 7 to 8 years before you start feeling the effects of depletion of B12. So you think you're okay, and then all of a sudden you have problems. But Colin Campbell said the exact same thing today. So with regard to sprouts, and a plant-based diet. If someone's on a plant-based diet and they want to kind of up their game and they start adding in sprouts and not just little on the top, but they're making the base of their salad sprouts and they're really getting into sprouts. What health benefits might they realize? Is there something noticeable energy wise? Their skin. Is there anything that they would notice from going from a really healthy diet anyway, a plant-based diet, and then adding in sprouts in a big way?
I would say when we talk about a whole food plant-based diet, almost most things that we define as whole foods are fractional foods that have been processed to a certain degree. Sprouts are a complete living enzymatically rich organism. So when you're eating the sprout, you are eating the root, the shoot, the endosperm, the embryo, the seed coat, the testa, and it's alive. So, and it's water and it's carbon and it's fiber. So when you're eating the sprout, you get a feeling of high and energy from eating it. Now, one of the things that's really important to think about with the sprouts is that if you're eating them, like with all changes in diet, because they are so potent, start small, finish big. Like most people are starting at the sprouting company, getting like a salad mix and getting broccoli sprouts and adding a couple of ounces a day of the sprouts to what they're eating. But the thing that is really important, like we have a epidemic going on in the United States and soon to be around the world with weight management and weight loss. And people are taking Ozempic, which is um, filling them up and triggering the release of the GL1 peptide in the brain to make people feel satiated, but it's also then slowing down digestion in the body. Well, it turns out sprouts can give you that same feeling in a healthy way because sprouts are very high in fiber, low in calories, and low in fat. So if someone wants to shift their weight and they increase their consumption of the sprouts and they eat them, the way you would intuitively want to eat, slowly, stare at the vegetables, start the digestive process with the eyes, chew on the vegetables, 50, 70, 100 times. Chew those sprouts, masticate them, let them go into the stomach and pass through the small intestine. If someone is eating a lot of sprouts, they will certainly optimize their weight in a very healthy, natural way.
So we had one speaker who was talking about hydration, not in terms of getting more water in by drinking a glass of water, but by getting water through the filtration process of living plants. Are sprouts good in
Yes,
that?
absolutely. Sprouts are very, very high concentration of water, structured water.
Oh, thank you. Actually, and they mentioned structured water. So, yeah, actually, one of our participants is asking about chia seeds and the fact that when people think about chia seeds and putting it in a liquid, it becomes gelatinous. It's actually used often for that purpose in various recipes. Is there any trick to sprouting chia seeds, or just rinse off the gelatinous part, or what happens?
No, no, there's no rinsing them off. Like once they become gelatinous, it becomes part of it. Um, eh, I would say the easiest technique to follow is the chia pet. So if you think about the chia pet, they are using terracotta, right, which is clay, which is condensed earth, and it's very porous. So you soak the terracotta plate, and you don't have to use a chia pet. You can get a unglazed um, clay tray. You soak it. You then take the chia seeds. You mix them in water for 15 minutes till it becomes gelatinous and a paste, and then you spread it out onto the terracotta tray. And then very frequently, you use a spray mister and you spray them, and you will actually see the, the seed sprout from within the gelatinous paste, and the shoot will go up, the root will go down, and you keep watering them, you get these chia sprouts.
How long does that process take? Like 3 days? Is that also like a 3 day process?
That's more like a 7 to 14 day process. Takes a little longer. typically you're growing them like a microgreen rather than a normal sprout done in a jar.
Thank you. So you mentioned, living
Can I
food.
make one other point, Michael? By soaking the chia seeds into the gelatinous paste and letting it sit as the gelatinous, nature is working. And by turning it in from a hard seed into that gelatinous paste or pudding, you can eat that directly. You don't need to take it to a full sprout level. You can eat the gelatinous part and you are having something that's very nutritious, very filling, very bioavailable.
Thank you. And so you mentioned living foods. So could you elaborate on the concept of living foods and how sprouts exemplify that category?
So most foods, when they are cooked, they are processed, they are denatured, they're using additives, preservatives, food colorings, pasteurizing them. They are becoming denatured and they are becoming extracted from their natural environment. So that's like one extreme. On the other extreme, you have sprouts. And then there's a full range and a full gamut of things in between. So, for example, an apple is not a living food, it's a raw food, right? Still healthy, still water based, still has a lot of its structure in place. So that is a raw food. The living foods are things that are still living and actively growing, independent of their microbiome and bacterial count. In its essence, it is still growing, which is predominantly grasses and sprouts.
So what does that mean? You use the example of the apple. Does that mean like any fruit that's taken off of the plant is raw and has a lot of health benefits, but it's not living because it's no longer part of the plant anymore? Is that
Correct. Correct.
Thank you. And so with sprouts being susceptible to bacterial growth, what best practices do you recommend for safe sprouting at home?
So I would say I published a white paper. And if you give me a moment, let me see if I can find it. Um, and I'll put it in the chat uh,
If
on
you want to
sprout safety.
you want to speak to it, you can even share your screen if you'd like to.
Um, just give me 1 second. Um, I like that I could share my screen. Um, but I think that I'll just put it in the chat because it's here. But basically, I did a study with Dr. Jed Fahey, who was the head of the chemoprotective center at Johns Hopkins University. And we were concerned was, hey, how safe are sprouts? And, when we looked at it, and actually, it's a good idea. Maybe I will share my screen. So if we look at it, short communication, open access, peer reviewed, unwily, sprout microbial safety, a reappraisal after a quarter century. So it talks about World Health Organization, talking about 1 in 10 people worldwide falls ill after eating contaminated food. This isn't sprouts. They're just talking about in general. So there's 600 million cases of foodborne diseases and 420,000 deaths globally. In the US, the CDC says 48 million people get sick from foodborne illness, 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die. So if you think we have 300 million people in the United States, 3,000 die, and a very small fraction of those illnesses are from sprouts. So we did the background. We talk about the development from the imbibed seed to germinating seed with a radical emergent from the primary root to the mature ones. And then we go down to how does the seed develop other parts. But then when we looked at safety and we realized that if someone were to follow this process, that they select the seed, they plant it, cultivate it, fertilize it, harvest it, test it in seed production for microbial part, then mechanically sort it out, and then sell them to the customers. And the customer could be commercial sprouting or consumer. If a consumer were to follow this process of surface level seed sanitation, sprout, grow, harvest, sanitize again, this is probably the safest food that one could possibly have. Now, commercial standards have now mandated that if you're buying commercial sprouts in the health food store or the supermarket, they must sanitize the seeds. They must do the microbial testing, and they're very safe. So if we look at commercial sprouting, it's a very mature process of, location, the process, how they follow the FDA guidelines. And home sprouting, has happened 10,000 years ago. But the conclusion, fresh sprouts are a way to consume vegetables safely. And so we did this paper and I'll put now in the chat. We wrote this paper so that people could actually feel comfortable and safe that sprouts were as safe, if not safer, than any other food that they could buy. Looking
So,
for here's the.
okay, okay, perfect. And do you want to grab that link oh, did you put it in there? Okay, great.
I
So
put it in there. Yeah, Michael, I'm on it.
you are on it. Very impressive. So, so one of the participants was asking about keeping the sprouts fresh. So let's say for most sprouts you said 3 days is the optimal time to eat them. Let's
Well, that
say
would be the broccoli sprouts. The other
oh,
sprouts could go 7 days, and broccoli sprouts can go 7 days. I was just talking about the bioavailability and the concentration of the sulforaphane potential of broccoli sprouts is day 3. Other sprouts, if you're growing them for food, you would grow them to day 5 or day 7.
and is such details outlined in your book, the sprout book?
They're in the book, and I also you could download, and it's a free app that we created in the for the Sprout for the Sprouting Company. We created a free app that people could download and use that would give them guidelines of how to sprout um, various items. So I'm going to just put that also in the link, but it's just a free app that people can guide them to proportions of seeds, to growing cycles, and there's even a a notification of when to do each step. So it's a real partner, and we did that as like a public service to help people successfully and safely grow sprouts.
Oh, great. So another question that I'm seeing is as far as the seeds themselves, or whatever you're using to sprout, how long do they last and still maintain their viability to become a sprout?
You know, like with anything, you don't want to be a hoarder. It's good to have things on hand. So typically the expiration date on seeds, could be about a year. And that's if they're stored in a cool, dark place or a refrigerator or a freezer. If they're just left out and open and they're oxidizing and they're exposed to, varying degrees of humidity shifts and temperature shifts, they could go bad earlier. And when
Right.
I say bad, they're just the germination rate would be affected.
And what are the most, obviously a lot of people are going to be doing this for the purposes of health, not just, plain subsistence. What are the most nutrient dense sprouts people should incorporate in their diets if they're looking to really give their health a boost?
I mean, the one that has the most research is broccoli sprouts. What I would say is that all of these sprouts are magical in plants, and you don't want to just focus on one single sprout. I would mix it up and add a lot of variety. So if someone's going to start, I recommend lentil sprouts for starting because they're so easy, and you could eat the lentil sprouts in as little as 2 days. And the lentils are a staple of the whole food plant-based diet around the world. They're already nutritious. When you sprout them, they're even more nutritious, and they're tasty and crunchy and easy to eat. So I would start with lentils and broccoli sprouts. Alfalfa sprouts are extremely popular in terms of sandwiches and wraps and adding to a variety of things, and super healthy. But it's really, there's so many sprouts are so healthy and so nutritious.
So basically, you can't go wrong. Choose the ones that you like, I guess.
That's correct. I'm with you, Michael.
So you advocate growing your own food. So for beginners, what are the easiest sprouts to start with, and what tips do you suggest for success?
I think alfalfa, mung beans, lentils, broccoli, they're all very easy. Anything that you could grow in a jar is very easy.
And what's your experience? How has your experience been living off of the water grid and the food grid? And by the way, how do you live off the water grid in a desert? I think that's probably something that's a little surprising to hear for some
Yeah,
people.
actually, we're off the electric grid now also. So we have solar, we have batteries, and then believe it or not, in the desert, 340 feet below our land, there is a geothermal mineral river that runs under our land. So we pump that water up, and then we have a desalination system that removes the minerals. So we'll soak in the hot springs vis-a-vis the minerals, and then we desalinate the water so we have drinking water and sprouting water.
Well, that sounds pretty amazing. And how okay, so the food, so you grow, I know you grow your own sprouts, but are you literally living off of only stuff that you've grown, or
No, I go to the farmer's market once a week and I'll eat fresh local fruit that's grown and for sale in season. And sometimes I'll treat myself and buy a head of lettuce, but most of the time I just prefer eating my sprouts.
all right, I'm gonna go to the audience here for a question. Gail B, please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm from Boise, Idaho, and I have a question about two different seeds. One is I bought some sunflower seeds for sprouting. They're specifically organic for sprouting, but they have the shell, they're in the shell. So I presume that you can't sprout them in water. You've got to do the soil sprouting. That's the first
You
question.
know, it depends how patient you are, Gail. You could actually sprout sunflower seeds. I would rinse them several times before I sprout them. Then you could sprout them in a jar, rinse them the same format, and they will not grow straight like a normal microgreen. They will grow curly, and within a week, you will have sunflower sprouts in a jar. You will just have to manually remove the black shell, although the black shell is cellulose and fiber. And if you were to chew it 50 times, you can masticate it and eat the whole thing, although it does not taste as good as the sprout itself.
Okay, great. And thank you. Also, the caraway seeds was the other one. I bought caraway seeds for sprouting, but I had trouble getting them to sprout. Didn't seem to be, I don't know. I wondered if there was anything special in the technique for caraway seeds that needed to be emphasized other than the routine sprouting system.
I think certain seeds, and where did you buy those from and when did you buy them?
I bought them from a place called Azure Standard. where I get a lot of organic food from, and they've been I probably got them last year, but I used them. I tried it right away, and then I put them aside because I didn't have success, and I thought I'll tackle it another time, and I never did get back to it again.
Yeah. I would say if you bought sprouting caraway seeds, those typically take, a week to 2 weeks, and they generally require soil or a sprouting medium. They will not just grow on their own. They need to be staying moist, they need to be dark, and you need to follow a more microgreen protocol to sprout
Oh,
the caraway.
okay, I see. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Gail. Keep on sprouting.
Thanks.
So now for new sprouters, you mentioned you can just get a jar and a cheesecloth and a lid. I know there are some sprouters on the market. I know that I believe that you have a sprouter yourself. That
Yes.
you're sell. Does it matter? Like, is that I know I've seen designs. They're very fancy. They're beautiful. They're easy to use. Is the product the same? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it was a very deliberate design process when I worked with my team to design the sprouting company jar. So the first thing that we did was we wanted to eliminate any aspects of the jar that would prevent water from draining out. So the normal, jars, have a ball shape and a lid and they narrow in order to accommodate the threads. And we put the threads on the outside and have a straight jar. So there's no water accumulation in the jar.
Hmm.
The other thing was when you make a big jar, one of my few things that give me anxiety still is broken glass. So when you made a big jar, it was slippery. So we made very custom detents so that you could grab the jar and not worry that you have a wet jar over a sink that you could grab. The other item is I sprouted for years using cheesecloth. Well, it turns out every time you're rinsing in the cheesecloth is actually collecting the biofilm, which actually could be collecting microbial activity. And so um, the window screen mesh, right? The mesh screen also collects, bacteria and biofilm. And don't get me started on plastic. I don't like my plastic touching my food, which I made that decision 5 years ago. And now the research is out on the microplastics. So the filter that we used was specifically made out of stainless steel that was dishwasher safe, rust proof, and allowed a good flow of air going in and out and drainage. So the jar and the stand and the filter were all designed to work together as an integrated kit. And we also made it 55 ounces. So it was much larger. So you could get a full crop of, of sprouts in it. So everything that was put into it was very deliberate. There was no decisions that were made that weren't the result of looking to build a better sprouter.
And if someone's considering having a large portion of their diet coming from sprouts, do you have multiple sprouters going the same time? Starting every day, you start a different one. Like how do you from a systematic perspective, how do you keep yourself in fresh food with sprouts? Given that if you have one jar, every 7 days you've got one batch. What do you
Yeah,
recommend?
I typically, will have anywhere from 6 to 12 jars going at any time. So I have different stages of different sprouts, and also depends whether I'm sprouting for myself, or for others. But I did for myself very well with initially 3 jars, and then I went to 6 jars. And with 6 jars, I was able to grow enough that I always had fresh sprouts on hand at different stages.
Okay. And so you touched on a question I was about to ask about when you were talking about the biofilm that accumulates on the cheesecloth and the plastic filters. In terms of food safety, what are the specific steps that you recommend taking to ensure that the sprouts you consume are free from pathogens?
So the number one, we made that, I made that point earlier. It really begins with the seed. And if there's any contamination, it's on the outside of the seed. And so at the sprouting company, all the seeds are tested for pathogens. They're tested for a high germination rate. And then if you want to add another level of caution, which I outlined in the white paper we published, you could then soak the seeds in either a white vinegar, glacial acetic acid, or sodium hypochlorous or sodium hypochloride, which, the sodium hypochlorous, they make these very low cost um, salt generators. It's like a saltwater pool. You take the water, you add a pinch of salt, it electrolyzes the water, and it's like a saltwater pool. And that can act as a disinfectant. In another case, as scary as this sounds, people are using bleach. So unscented bleach, 1 tablespoon, 1 part bleach, 5 parts water is a rapid oxidizing um, formula. But basically, you take the seeds, you soak them in, the white vinegar, for 5 to 15 minutes. You rinse a few times to get off any trace residues. And by using the white vinegar or the bleach, you can reduce the external level of bacteria potential by 3 million to 1. So you can really inoculate anything that's on there, and all depends on the sliding scale. If you do 15 minutes in the bleach you could get 3 million to 1. But what I could say is I've been out there in the world and I've never heard of people getting sick from it, no, from the sprouts. I think that there was some very, very poor sanitation standards, cross contamination between animal products and the sprouts, and no one was there to defend the sprouts. Like there's breakouts and food recalls every day, in industries on fish, and dairy and meat. And, like I just had a conversation 2 weeks ago with Michael Greger, and he talked about how the government standards for selling chicken now have resulted in the recommendation: do not wash the chicken, because by washing the chicken, you are spreading salmonella. And they've now raised the legal limit that they're now legally allowed to sell chicken with salmonella on it, because they don't have an efficient mechanism to kill the salmonella. It's just so prevalent in the poultry industry. And they say, we know it has salmonella. Do not try to wash it, or you're going to spread it all over and make it worse. That, just try to like get it into the oven and roast it until there's no red parts and you're killing everything. And Dr. Greger says you're probably safer eating out of your toilet than eating out of your sink if you've got chicken in there. And sprouts are a whole different world where you could really control your environment and keep things clean and keep things healthy.
I know that when you hear about recalls for like spinach, it's usually something with E. coli that comes from a contamination from an animal. So that is very common. It's my understanding.
Well, it's not necessarily the animal. It could actually be a human animal pooping in the field and not washing their hands. And so, what I like about the sprouts is you can get the seeds, you can control the seeds, you can sanitize them, you can wash them, and you can make sure you're working in a very clean environment. But the other thing which I will say is when you're buying traditional vegetables, and I love vegetables and I love fruit, the lettuces could be old. They could be a week, 2 week, up to 3 weeks old on the lettuces that you're buying. Whereas the sprouts you're eating fresh, just fresh. Like you become the farmer. And during World War II, 40% of Americans had their own garden. And today, less than 1% of Americans have their own garden. So I really like, my dream is that everyone's growing their own food, taking control of their own health.
Wow, that's an astonishing statistic. So what are common mistakes that new sprouters, people who are beginning the sprouting journey, make when they begin to sprout their own sprouts?
I mean, the most common mistake that people make is that they don't read the instructions and they don't know the difference between soaking and rinsing. So I've had people that they take the seeds, they put them in the jar, and then a week later, they're expecting the sprouts. So you got to follow the instructions. Another step is people will forget to rinse the sprouts on a particular day, and the sprouts need the water. So that's an important part that you just need to follow the instructions. If you follow the instructions, 99% of your sprouts will come out beautifully.
So can you discuss the role of sprouts in disease prevention and management?
I mean, basically, there's so much information about the benefits of the whole food plant based diet. And just think of sprouts as whole food plant based. So every benefit of consuming a whole food plant based salt or no salt, oil, sugar diet, you can achieve through eating sprouts. Sprouts are vegetables. They just happen to be fresher and more nutrient dense.
And how about the economics of sprouting? So, one of the knocks, which I don't find to be true in my own personal life, but one of the knocks on, going whole food plant-based is that it's expensive as if, rice and beans is more expensive than beef. But they'll say that. What are the economics? If someone is going and start adding in sprouts in a major way into a lifestyle, what are the economics that they should experience in doing so?
I mean, it's unbelievable. I think that when you're consuming sprouts, they are very affordable, very available. And, for example, if you were to go to the health food store to buy a serving of sprouts, like a little clamshell, it could be $3 to $5, right? $1.25 to $1.50 an ounce. If you were to grow those on your own, it's like 50 cents. It's really inexpensive to grow your own sprouts. And it's almost like you want to go buy custom furniture, you're going to pay an arm and a leg. You want to get Swiss design, Swiss engineering, um, affordable. You go to IKEA, but you got to have some skin in the game. You got to load it up, it's shipped flat, you got to read the instructions. But this is very easy because the instructions are ABC.
Great. And how do sprouts contribute to gut health? And is there research that you can cite about the implications of sprouts on gut health?
Yeah, I would say the best, the leading plant-based gastroenterologist is Dr. B, who wrote Fiber Fueled. And what he will say is that sprouts are a prebiotic because of the fiber, that sprouts contain both soluble and insoluble fiber, and they support the microbiome. And what's important is to have a diversity of your sprouts and of your other vegetables, along with naturally raw fermented products, and that's supporting gut health.
Thank you. And now, do you ferment any of your own products
I do. I do. I have a fresh batch of a sauerkraut going right now on my countertop.
so you're purchasing the cabbage from the farmer's market and then making your own
Correct.
and
Correct.
Can you speak to that process out of curiosity? Making your own
I
sauerkraut?
mean, it's kind of like it's really magical, the process of making a kraut. You get the the sauerkraut, you cut it right into the shreds that you'd like, typically bigger than what your final output would be. And then you put it in the a big bowl. And I've experimented with you not using salt, but making celery juice for my salt. But now I actually just use a salt. I use a high quality Celtic sea salt, and I add, the relative amount, for the portion that I have. And then by washing your hands clean, or if you're really neurotic, you could use gloves. Um, but you take your hands, you wash them clean, you take the salt, and as you rub it, the salt will actually elicit a sweating from the cabbage. And so you really want to get everything in, all the salt dissipated, starts to sweat. Then you jam it into a jar. And we actually have a 10-quart clay crock pot. Jam it in, you weigh it down, and then check it over the days, for it to burp and let out the extra, gases that are forming. And it's a really simple process. And then
Is
you could add whatever other seasonings or sprouts into it, and then you get your sauerkrauts.
is there liquid involved in that, or you just is it
No,
just really just cabbage
no,
and
yeah, the brine is actually taking the water molecules from the cytoplasm of the insoluble fiber of the cabbage.
wow. Okay. Okay. And then you add sprouts to the sauerkraut, you said.
Yeah, I do all sorts of different things, different sprouts, different seasonings, different gadgets. It's one, and then I use the the brine from my homemade sauerkraut as the base of my dressings.
Wow. Okay. That's I guess you're using all parts. I guess that's what you have to do when you're trying to live off the food grid out in the desert. That's amazing. So, how does if you can speak to this, and you spoke to it a little bit earlier, how does the nutritional life cycle of a sprout from germination to full growth affect its antioxidant levels?
The biggest shift occurs in about 3 days as the metamorphosis goes from that dormant living organism with all these protective factors around it to once it starts to mix with the water, the carbon, and the oxygen, is actually activating the antioxidants within the vegetable.
Okay. And are there any beans that we should not sprout? I've heard that that red kidney beans were not safe to sprout. Is there any truth to that?
The large beans, like the red kidney beans, when you sprout them, you should then cook them as well. But I believe that the lectins madness, and we didn't go down that path, was grossly overstated. But I believe that the large beans, like the lectin, like the kidney beans, I have never used them for sprouting, um, because of that large, hard shell. But if I were to want to eat kidney beans, I would soak them, germinate them, sprout them, and then, steam them or cook them in some other way.
Okay. So that's how you'd go about that. And can you discuss the historical use of sprouts in traditional diets around the world?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about it. Around the world, um, we have seasons, we have famine, we have flood, we've got enormous shifts in temperature. the sprouts can grow in almost any environment. And so the process of storing and saving seeds really became, nature's cheat code. So I know, like in 2020, when the pandemic was here, I had hundreds of pounds of seeds that I could sprout, and those seeds were anywhere from 6 months to 2 years old, and in 35-pound buckets. And so they were very available. So I think that in various parts of the world, and there's, from Egypt, there's history of sprouting seeds 10,000 years old, 6,000 years old, that germinated 1,200 years later, that they're finding these seeds. So I think that seeds, and if you think about, reproductive systems, whether it be sperm or seeds and the like, nature has provided abundance of fail-safe mechanisms to provide for future instances. So I think that seeds, you look at, and I wrote this in my book, you look at an oak tree, that big oak tree was formed from one acorn. And one acorn formed a tree that in its lifetime will produce tens of thousands, if not a million, acorns. And then each of those acorns can then reproduce themselves to more. So it's multiplicative. But the reality is the average tree may not spawn off another tree. But with sprouting seeds, you can go from a single seed to a sprout, to a microgreen, to a mature vegetable. That mature vegetable will then flower, and then the flower will then fruit, and then that fruit inside will have pods with infinite amount of seeds to begin that process all over again.
So when someone's getting started and figuring out where to get their seeds from that they're planning on sprouting, how can someone ensure the sprout seeds they purchase are of high quality and safe to consume?
Well, look, Michael, for 5 years, I talked about sprouts and sources. And then ultimately, I had so many questions and so many concerns that I decided to, form a company to source the seeds where there was transparency and quality standards and lab verification. And then I even went to the level, on top of all else, getting the detox-free project certification, where we sent the seeds out, addition to everything else, to make sure they were tested for no glyphosate, no Roundup on the seeds. So this was just, being concerned that nothing is more true than you are what you eat. So I really wanted to know what I was eating. And, one of the things that I learned on the broccoli seeds was we sent out, I was testing, before I had the company, and then where do the broccoli seeds come from? How do they germinate? How do they grow? What was in them? And so people talked about the anti-cancer compound sulforaphane, which stems from glucoraphanin. So I bought a bunch of seeds from many suppliers, and I sent them to the lab, and some of them had no glucoraphanin in them. So then I sent them to another lab to sequence the DNA of them, and they said, well, it's in the brassica family, but we can't exactly identify this as broccoli, but it's probably not, which is why it doesn't have any glucoraphanin, aka sulforaphane, in it. So that's where I just realized that there were tools, and this was really the wild, wild west of a new category. So I wanted to establish standards and guidelines and use the technology available to do testing and validation and verification.
So, what are some misconceptions about sprouts and sprouting that you'd like to address?
I mean, the biggest one is that people think of sprouts as a garnish, and they add it infrequently, when in fact sprouts are a food and you can eat them every day and you can eat them in abundance and you could actually be really satiated and nourished. So that's like the biggest one. The most ridiculous one is that, they're not safe. Like that's just absurd. There's some shills from the meat industry or the pharma or something spreading, false information about that to keep you, eating, sterilized, processed, probably what the ones that want you to walk around with a gallon of Purell, you know, pouring it on every person who you meet in the street.
And of the people who are saying it's unsafe, what do they even say about sprouts?
I mean, I don't even know. Like, I really don't even know, what they're, talking about. I think the essence is they're saying, oh, they could be mold, there could be they could spread E. coli and the like, when the fact is there's, infinitely more cases of foodborne illness from other foods than sprouts, but no one was the voice of sprouts before. So sprouts were pretty much fundamentally ignored in the United States, where in other parts of the world, I went, over Christmas, I went to Japan and I visited a company that's actually, and I will share my screen for a second because this is really impressive. Um, so one second. I'm going to share my screen. So I visited this company, and it was just so, wonderful to see that in this community people were aware of. Look at this. So this is a sprout factory in Japan where they grow $1 billion worth of broccoli sprouts a year. And they're selling them in 20,000 retail stores. These massive machines selling broccoli sprouts, throughout all of Japan. And so they are easily serving 400,000 to 500,000 servings of broccoli sprouts because Japan understood and the benefits of the broccoli sprouts and their anti-cancer compounds. And so they see it as a health food, and they have a fully robotic, state-of-the-art system to grow the sprouts. So, when I saw that, I was extremely encouraged to think like, oh, well, the US is 10 times bigger than Japan, that people will wake up and sprouts can become a major source of food, in the world and in this country.
So, with the fear of skyrocketing prices, food instability or insecurity, um, how would you recommend, in this volatile world, how would you recommend that people prepare sprouts if they wanted to um, prepare for the apocalypse, if you will, and make sure they have enough? I mean, it seems like sprouts, as opposed to having seeds that you'd have to garden, when the world it goes to
Yeah,
bed.
Michael,
Yeah.
I have faith that I don't think we're going to get to this, that stage of apocalypse. What
Mm.
we will have is somewhere between there, where we're in a stage where you're going to be buying fruits and vegetables today that are covered in something called appeal, APEEL, which who knows what's in that item that's basically wrestling against nature to keep things looking fresher or better for longer. And they're not even disclosing whether they're using that or not. So you're buying something and you could be biting into an apple that has some coating on it with who knows what's on it. Even more concerning, even more concerning is that they are now experimenting and fighting for legislation that says they can inject vaccines into your food without disclosing it. So you may get, a apple or a head of lettuce or something that could be injected with a vaccine without consent, without disclosure, without dosing. And maybe it's a small dose, maybe it's a large dose. So what I'm concerned with is progressively more and more of our rights around food safety and agency will be taken away. And so I look at Sprouts as a way where I can control, what I eat and what my family eats, because the people think that, and this is the real truth about health, not the real truth about conspiracies. But people think that these government agencies are designed to protect you, when in fact these government agencies are actually protecting the sellers, and they work for the sellers, and not for us. So it's really responsible for us, and that's where I have so much respect, for you, Michael, for doing this, for Stephen Shore, for having this conference and sharing this information and getting the best and brightest so people can take care of themselves and understand the essence of food is medicine and medicine is food. And also, I haven't watched the whole conference, but it seems to be a lot of love around the whole food plant-based diet.
Mm-hmm. So thank you. Yes. So you have about 1 minute. Anything you'd like to say to the audience before we go?
I just want to say thank you for being awake. Thank you for being present. Thank you for listening. This is my life's work, and I've been deeply moved by the reception. The Sprout book. I never wrote anything in my whole life. I never went to college, so the idea of writing a book was really, really hard for me. And the book was well received, and people are interested. So there's always some trolls out there, but for the most part, the message of sprouting has been very well received, and it's now snowballing, and it's really exciting.
Great. So, Doug, thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us this evening. If we could unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.